They came for her at 11 o'clock at night. Not with knocking. Not with the polite hesitation of people who still had some shame left in them. They came with heavy feet on the hostel staircase and a fist that hit the door like it already owned what was behind it. Ada Cole was still awake. She almost always was at that hour, her laptop open, her notes spread across the narrow bed. Her mind somewhere deep inside a problem that the rest of her class would not even attempt until morning. That was the thing about Ada that people noticed before they noticed anything else about her. Not her face, though her face was worth noticing. Not her voice, though it carried a quiet that made rooms lean in. What people noticed first was that she was always thinking. Always somewhere slightly ahead of where her body was standing. She closed the laptop when she heard the knock. Something in the sound of it, the weight, the certainty, told her that whoever was on the other side of that door had not come to ask for anything. They had come to take. She was right. Travis pushed in first. He was 26 years old and had the particular confidence of a man who had never had to earn anything. Broad-shouldered, wearing a polo shirt that was too tight across the chest, smelling of the kind of cheap cologne that announces itself before the person wearing it enters a room. He was Ada's brother. Or rather, and this distinction would matter more than she knew, he was Aunt Bertha's biological son, which had always meant he was something closer to Ada's keeper than her sibling. Behind him came two men she did not recognize. They were not Travis's friends. They were hired. She could tell by the way they stood in the doorway without fully entering, the way men stand when they are being paid to be somewhere rather than choosing to be there. Ada stood up slowly from the bed. She did not ask what they wanted. She already knew. She had known for 3 weeks, since the evening she had come home for the midterm break and overheard Aunt Bertha in the parlor, speaking in that low, satisfied voice she only used when she believed she had solved something difficult. Raymond, the man Aunt Bertha had been speaking to, was a building contractor from their hometown. 43 years old, twice divorced. He had been trying to buy himself a young wife for 2 years and had finally found someone willing to sell him one. Aunt Bertha had agreed on a bride price of 2 million naira. The bride was Ada. "Pack your things," Travis said. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way you tell someone to pack when the decision has already been made and the cruelty has already been absorbed into the arrangement itself. "Mama said to bring you tonight. Raymond wants the introduction done before the weekend." Ada looked at her brother for a long moment. She thought about the 11 years she had spent in that house. The mornings she had woken before everyone to start the gas cooker because Aunt Bertha's knees hurt. The school fees she had paid for herself from the age of 15 through every scholarship she could find and every lesson she could give to younger children in the neighborhood. The way she had folded herself small, taken up less space, made herself useful enough that they could not easily justify sending her away, not understanding until now that being sent away had always been the plan. She had simply not yet been valuable enough to sell. She looked at the two hired men. She looked at Travis. Then she picked up her laptop, put it in her bag, and walked toward the door. Travis stepped aside. He thought she was complying. She was not complying. She walked out of the hostel room and turned left. Not right. Right led to the staircase Travis had come up. Left led to the fire exit at the end of the corridor, the one that opened onto the narrow path behind the building, the one that students used when they came back after curfew and did not want the security guard to log their names. She heard Travis shout behind her. She was already running. The fire door hit the night air and she ran into it. The darkness, the Lagos drizzle, the wet smell of the gutter that ran along the back fence, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. She ran without looking back. Her bag was on her shoulder. Her phone was in her hand. She had 6,300 naira in her account. She had nowhere to go. She ran anyway. She had not gone far when she stopped at a roadside kiosk, the kind that stays open past midnight selling water and small things to people who need them urgently. She needed water. Her throat was burning in a way she put down to the running, to the fear, to the adrenaline of a body doing what it needed to do to survive the night. A man at the kiosk pressed a bottle into her hand before she could ask for it. He said it was on him. He smiled the particular smile of someone performing helpfulness. She drank it without thinking because she was running and her throat was burning and the kindness of strangers felt, in that moment, like the only currency she had. She would not remember this clearly until much later. She would remember the burning throat. She would remember the way her legs felt heavier than they should as she kept running. She would put these things down to the night itself and not understand them until she was sitting in a doctor's chair 32 days later, listening to a sentence that rearranged everything. There are things about Ada Cole that the running does not show you. Things you only understand if you go back to the beginning. Back past the hostel and the scholarship and the university acceptance letter that Aunt Bertha had held up like it was her own achievement. Back past the secondary school where Ada had finished first in her state. Back past the primary school where a teacher named Mrs. Afalabi had looked at a quiet 7-year-old girl doing mathematics in the margin of her exercise book and said, with genuine wonder in her voice, "Where did you come from?" Ada had laughed at that, the way children laugh when they do not fully understand what is being asked. But the question would follow her. It would follow her longer than she knew. She had come from somewhere else entirely. But that part of the story was not yet hers to tell. Not yet. What she knew, what she had always known, in the way children know things before they have the language for them, was that she did not quite fit inside Aunt Bertha's house. Not because she was treated badly, not at first. In the early years, Aunt Bertha had been careful. Warm enough. The coldness came slowly. In the way seasons change, you do not notice it until one morning you step outside and realize the air has changed completely and you are not dressed for it. The calculation had always been there, underneath. Ada simply had not known what she was being calculated toward. She found out when she was 18. Not from Aunt Bertha. From Travis, who told her one afternoon with the casual cruelty of someone who considers cruelty a form of honesty. "You know you're not actually her child," he said. They were watching television. He did not even look at her when he said it. "She picked you up somewhere. Some arrangement. Don't get too comfortable." Ada had not responded. She had sat very still and let the information move through her the way water moves through a cracked wall, finding the gaps, spreading into everything. She had never asked Aunt Bertha about it. There was nothing to ask. The truth had been confirmed by the silence that lived in the house. In the way Aunt Bertha's face softened when she looked at Travis and became something careful and managed when it turned to Ada. In the way Ada's school fees were always a conversation but Travis's expenses were never questioned. She had decided, sitting in front of that television at 18 years old, that the only power she had was the one already inside her. The gift that Mrs. Afalabi had seen in the margins of her exercise book. The thing that no one could collect as a bride price or use to pay off a debt. She would build her life out of that. And she would not need anyone's permission to do it. She had been doing exactly that. Quietly, stubbornly, brilliantly, until the night Travis came to the hostel door with 2 hired men and reminded her that brilliance, without protection, is still vulnerable. The rain was heavier now. Ada stood at the edge of the main road, breathing hard, her bag clutched to her chest. She had been running for nearly 10 minutes. She was 3 streets from the university, in the kind of stretch of road that exists in every Lagos neighborhood. Not quite commercial, not quite residential, lit by the headlights of passing cars and the orange glow of a fuel station 50 meters away. She could not go back to the hostel. Travis would be waiting. She could not call her roommate. The last thing she needed was to pull someone else into this. She had 6,300 naira. A phone. A laptop. Clothes, notes, and she had somewhere to be in 4 days. The qualifying round of the Innovate Nigeria Technology Prize, the most prestigious student tech competition in the country. The one she had been building toward for 8 months. The one she had spent her midterm break preparing for instead of resting, because resting felt like a luxury she had not yet earned. She stood in the rain and breathed and thought. A car slowed beside her. Not the slow of someone stopping, the cautious slow of someone who has seen a young woman standing alone in the rain at night and is deciding whether to stop or keep moving. The window came down. The man inside was not what she expected. She did not know what she had expected. Something leering, something calculating. What she saw instead was a man who looked exhausted in the specific way that people with too much responsibility look exhausted. Late 30s. Sharp features softened by tiredness. A jacket that cost more than her semester fees draped over the passenger seat. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was such a simple question. Such a plain, unadorned question. She could not tell, from the way he asked it, whether he expected an answer or was simply performing the minimum decency required before driving on. "I need a ride," she said. "I can pay. Not much, but I can pay." He looked at her for a moment. She held his gaze. She realized distantly, dripping onto the road. "Get in," he said. She got in. His name was Daniel Osei, though she did not know that yet. She did not know, sitting in the passenger seat of that car with her wet bag on her lap and her heart still running even though her legs had stopped, that the man beside her had spent the last 3 hours at a dinner he had not wanted to attend, arranged by a grandmother who had decided that his continued bachelorhood was a personal insult to the Osei family name. She did not know that he had sat through introductions to 4 women in one evening. 4 carefully arranged, elegantly presented, thoroughly unsuitable women, and had excused himself early, ignoring his grandmother's voice in his ear because at 37 years old, he had built a technology company from a room in a Face Me I Face You apartment in Surulere into one of the 10 most valuable digital infrastructure firms in West Africa, and he did not believe that a woman who would transform his life would arrive through an arrangement. She did not know any of that. She told him she needed to get to the mainland. He said he was going that way. She leaned against the door, intending to stay awake, and was asleep within 4 minutes. He noticed. He did not wake her. When they reached his building, the directions she had given him were to a friend's address, but the friend was not answering, and Daniel had sat in the car for 10 minutes trying to decide what a reasonable person does in this situation. He told his driver to help carry her bag. He put her in the guest room. He instructed his housekeeper to check on her. He went to his own room and did not think about her again until morning. Or rather, he tried not to. He was not entirely successful. She woke up not knowing where she was. The ceiling was too far away. The bed was too soft. The room smelled of something expensive and neutral, the smell of spaces that are cleaned by professionals rather than lived in by people. She sat up and the night came back to her in pieces. The hostel, Travis, the door, the road, the rain, the car. She found her bag beside the bed, her laptop inside it, undisturbed. She sat very still for a moment, doing what she always did when she needed to assess a situation. She thought about it completely before reacting to it. She was in a stranger's house. She had fallen asleep in his car. He had brought her inside rather than leaving her there or taking her somewhere worse. Her bag had not been touched. She was unharmed. These were facts. She arranged them carefully. Then she picked up her bag and went to find him. Daniel was in the kitchen when she appeared in the doorway. He was standing at the counter reading something on his phone, still in the clothes he had worn the night before, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked up when he heard her and his expression shifted in a way she could not immediately read. "You're awake," he said. "I want to thank you," she said. "And I want to pay you. And then I want to leave." Something flickered across his face. "You don't have to pay me." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to. What I owe you for the ride." He looked at her for a moment with an expression that she would later identify as surprise. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind, the surprise of a person who has learned to expect something and found something different instead. He named a figure, a deliberately small one. She handed him the cash from her wallet, counted exactly, held it out without embarrassment because she had learned a long time ago that apologizing for what you have is a form of agreeing that you should have more before you are allowed to take up space. He took it. He looked at it for a second. He put it on the counter. "Sit down," he said. "Eat something before you go." She sat. Not because she was told to, because she was hungry and because refusing food on principle when you are hungry is a luxury she had never been able to afford. The housekeeper brought eggs and bread and tea. Ada ate with the focused efficiency of someone who treats a meal as fuel rather than a social occasion. Daniel watched her in the way a person watches someone who has surprised them and is still deciding what that surprise means. "What happened to you last night?" he asked. "On the road. A family situation," she said. "Are you safe now?" She considered the question with genuine honesty. "I will be," she said. "I just need to get back to school and focus on something important." "What's the something important?" "A competition. Technology prize. I've been working on a project for 8 months. She paused. "I'll be fine. Thank you for last night." She stood up. She picked up her bag. And she left. She did not think about him as she walked out of that building and into the Lagos morning. She was already thinking about the competition, about the code she still needed to refine, about where she was going to sleep for the next 4 days while she figured out what to do about Travis and Aunt Bertha. She did not think about him, but she noticed, when she got to the road and looked down at her phone, that someone had quietly charged it overnight. She stood there for a moment, just a moment, then she kept walking. 32 days later, Ada sat in a doctor's office and heard a sentence that rearranged everything. She was pregnant. She sat with that word the way she sat with every difficult thing. Completely still, completely present, not running from it or toward it. Just letting it be exactly what it was. The doctor was speaking. She heard the words at a slight distance, the way you hear things when your mind is processing something too large for the moment. She asked the only question that felt relevant. How far along? The answer brought the night in the car back to her. Not the night itself, but the hours before it. The evening she had been running. The drink someone had pressed into her hand at the roadside kiosk near the university while she was waiting for a bus. A man she did not know who had said it was just water, who had smiled the smile of someone performing helpfulness. The burning in her throat that she had dismissed as adrenaline. The way her legs had felt heavier than they should as she ran. She had not been drunk. She had been drugged. And the drug had still been working when she fell asleep in Daniel Osei's car. When she woke up in his guest room. The housekeeper's report, later, would confirm that she had been disoriented in the night. That she had walked, half-conscious, down the corridor. She understood now what she had not understood then. She sat in the doctor's chair and thought about it. The full, complicated, terrible shape of it. The thing that had happened to her without her consent, in the dark space between running for her life and waking up somewhere safe. She thought about the man who had given her that drink. She thought about Raymond, who had sent men to the hostel that night, who had paid for a bride he had not yet collected and would have used whatever means were available to collect her. She thought about Daniel Osei, who had taken her off a wet road in the rain and put her in a guest room and charged her phone and accepted her 6,300 naira without condescension. She was pregnant. The circumstances were complicated in a way she did not yet have all the pieces to explain. And she had a competition in 36 hours. She made her decision in the chair. She was keeping the child. Not because she had planned for this. Not because she had a support system or financial stability or a co-parent she trusted. But because the doctor, answering a question Ada had asked almost before she knew she was asking it, had looked at her chart and said something quietly devastating. She had a condition, structural, present since birth. It made conception difficult, genuinely medically difficult. This pregnancy, the doctor said gently, might be the only one she ever had. Ada sat with that. She sat with the full weight of it. She looked at the wall of the doctor's office and she thought about loss and about gift and about the difference between the two. And she arrived, in the quiet of that room, at a place of total certainty. She stood up. She thanked the doctor. She walked out. She had a competition to win. There was one person who knew how much it meant. Sandra had been Ada's closest friend since the first week of university. The kind of friendship that forms quickly and feels solid, built on shared late nights and borrowed notes and the particular ease of two people who have found each other in a place where finding anyone feels difficult. Sandra was sharp and funny and quicker to laugh than Ada, which made her good company in the long stretches of work that university required. She had been the one Ada told about Aunt Bertha. The one who had sat with her through the semester when the money ran out and Ada had lived on the minimum while pretending to everyone else that everything was fine. Ada trusted her in the way you trust the people who have seen you at your most reduced and not flinched. She told Sandra about the competition that same evening. About the win she intended. Sandra had hugged her and said you've got this and meant it or seemed to. Ada had gone home and worked. The Innovate Nigeria Technology Prize had been running for 6 years. It was the kind of competition that changed trajectories, the kind where the winner's name got spoken in rooms they had never entered, where sponsorship offers arrived before the check was even signed, where a brilliant unknown became a known quantity overnight. Ada had built something for it that she had never shown anyone. It was a diagnostic tool. Clean, lightweight, deployable on low-bandwidth networks. It was designed to assist community health workers in rural areas with patient intake, capturing symptoms, flagging urgency levels, routing cases to the right facilities without requiring the kind of infrastructure that rural Nigeria could not reliably count on. She had built it in her 3rd year, refining it through her 4th, testing it against real data she had gathered through a university partnership with 3 clinics in Ogun State. It was not flashy. It was not the kind of thing that looked impressive in a 30-second pitch. But it worked. It worked in conditions where other systems failed. It worked for the people who most needed things to work. She believed in it the way she believed in very few things, completely without performance. She submitted it the morning of the competition and sat in the waiting room of the auditorium at Riverton Business School, where this year's finals were being held, with her phone off and her mind arranged around the code, the way you arrange furniture around something you love. She did not know that in a building 4 kilometers away, someone who had been looking for her for 3 weeks had finally found what he was looking for. Daniel Osei had not forgotten the girl from the road. He had told himself he had. He was good at telling himself things and then getting on with the business of running a company with 1,100 employees and a board that needed managing and a grandmother who called every Sunday without fail to ask him why he was still alone. But he had thought about her. The exact way she had counted the money. The fact that she had eaten without apology. The thing she had said, "I will be," when he asked if she was safe. Not "I am. I will be." As if safety was something she was still in the process of building for herself rather than something she expected anyone to hand her. He had set someone to look into it, quietly. Not because he was a man who paid people to investigate women he had met. He was not that, and he knew the difference. But because something about the night on the road had not settled correctly in him. The way she had been standing there. The state of her. The story she had not quite told. What his investigator found was not what he had expected. There was a man named Raymond, a building contractor. There was a woman named Bertha who had entered into an arrangement with this man. There was a transaction that, when Daniel looked at the documentation his investigator had quietly gathered, made him sit down in his chair and be still for a long moment. There was also surveillance footage from a roadside kiosk near the university. A man pressing a drink into a young woman's hand. A young woman's gait changing within minutes. A man on a phone watching her run. Daniel sat with that footage for a very long time. He made several calls. He engaged a lawyer. He did certain things quietly that would take several weeks to fully resolve. Things that would eventually result in Raymond learning that some transactions have consequences that outlast the money. And then he went to find her. He found her at the worst possible moment. Or rather, he found her at a moment that looked, on the surface, like the worst possible one, but would later reveal itself as the hinge the whole story turned on. He arrived at the Innovate Nigeria auditorium during the finalist presentations. He did not intend to make himself known immediately. He was there, he told himself, simply to see that she was all right, to observe from a distance, to decide based on what he saw what the appropriate next step was. He found a seat in the back. He waited. When Ada walked onto that stage, he recognized her immediately. The same contained quality. The same sense of someone who has learned to take up exactly the space they need and not 1 centimeter more. She presented for 19 minutes. He watched the judges' faces. He watched the room. He understood by the end of those 19 minutes that she was going to win. Not because she was charming. She was not performing charm. Not because she was loud. She was not loud. But because what she had built was genuinely extraordinary, and the room could feel it, and there is a particular silence that falls over a space when everyone in it is realizing they are in the presence of something real. The silence fell. And then the panel chair leaned into his microphone and began to speak. And then everything that had been quiet became very loud, very fast. It started with a voice from the side of the auditorium. A voice that Ada knew. Sandra had been Ada's closest friend since their first year. Or she had been what Ada had believed was her closest friend, which is a different thing, though the difference is not always visible until the moment it becomes impossible to ignore. Sandra was standing near the side exit, and what she said into the sudden quiet of that room, in a voice designed to carry, was not something a friend says. She said that Ada was pregnant. She said it with the precise delivery of someone who has been planning the moment. She said it like a weapon. The room shifted. The panel chair's expression changed. A murmur moved through the audience like a wind across still water. Ada stood on that stage and felt everything she had worked for tremble. She stood very still. She let the murmur settle. She looked at Sandra, at the person she had trusted, the person who had sat with her through late nights and borrowed her notes and laughed with her in the particular easy way that makes you believe in the safety of a friendship, and she felt something clarify inside her. The way things clarify under pressure. The way a person becomes most clearly themselves in the moment when everything threatens to come apart. She turned back to the panel. She did not apologize. She did not cry. She did not perform distress or defend herself against the implicit accusation in Sandra's voice. She said, very quietly into the microphone, "I am pregnant. I am also the person who built what I just showed you. I'd like to know which of those facts changes the quality of the work." The room was completely silent. And then Daniel Osei stood up in the back row. He had not planned to. He was a man who was almost always exactly where he intended to be, doing exactly what he had intended to do. But something about watching Ada Cole stand on that stage alone, with something that had been done to her without her knowledge being used against her in public, in a room full of people she was supposed to be impressing. Something about it moved him out of his careful plans and into the simple instinct of a person who sees an injustice and cannot sit still for it. He stood up. He walked to the front of the room. He said his name, which the room recognized. He said that he was the founder of Osay Digital and a longtime sponsor of Innovate Nigeria, which the panel chair knew. He said that he had reviewed this particular project and found it to be the most technically accomplished work submitted to this competition in at least 3 years. He said that a contestant's personal life was not a metric by which technical work was evaluated. He said this simply, without flourish. He said it looking at the panel and not at Ada. And then he stepped back. Ada looked at him. She had not seen him come in. She had not known he was there. And now he was standing in the front of a room that had, 30 seconds ago, been tilting against her. And the room had righted itself the way rooms right themselves when someone with authority decides which way is up. She looked at him with an expression he could not read. He was not sure anyone could have read it. It was not gratitude or not only gratitude. It was something more complicated than that. The expression of a person who has been helped and is still deciding what the help means and what, if anything, it will cost. The panel chair cleared his throat. The room settled. The presentations continued. Ada won. She won by a margin that the chair described as, in 6 years of this competition, unprecedented. She stood at the podium with the certificate and the check and the room applauding around her, and she was somewhere only partly in her body, one part of her still on the stage, present and composed, and another part of her already thinking about what came next. The child. The clinic appointment she had been rescheduling for 2 weeks. Aunt Bertha. The thing she had not yet figured out about the night in the car. After the applause, she looked for Daniel. He was near the exit, talking to someone from the panel. He saw her looking. He said something to the man he was speaking with and walked toward her. They stood facing each other in the thinning crowd of an auditorium that smelled of projection equipment and air conditioning and the particular electric residue of a room where something important has just happened. "You were here," she said. "I was looking for you," he said. "I found something. About the night before you were on the road. About what happened to you." She looked at him carefully. "Tell me," she said. He told her. She listened to all of it without moving. The man at the kiosk. The footage. Raymond. The thing that had happened in the space between the drug and the guest room. She listened with her whole self, not the composed performance of listening, but the real kind, the kind that costs something. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I know," she said finally. He looked at her. "I worked it out," she said. "I just didn't have all the pieces." She paused. "I do now." She did not ask him what he expected from her. She did not perform gratitude or distress or anything. She stood in the clearing crowd of that auditorium and looked at him with the same expression she had worn on the stage. Complicated, present, not yet decided. "I'm keeping the child," she said. "I want you to know that I'm not telling you because I want something from you." I'm telling you because it's the truth and you're involved in it and you deserve to know. He was quiet for a moment. What do you need? He asked. Nothing, she said immediately. Ada. She paused at the sound of her name in his mouth. He had not used it before. It was the first time. Nothing right now, she said more honestly. I need to think. He nodded. He took out a card. He held it out. She looked at it for a moment before she took it. When you're ready, he said. Not before. She put the card in her bag. She walked out of the auditorium into the Lagos afternoon. The heat, the noise, the city that had been trying to swallow her whole for 4 years and had not yet managed it. She walked and she thought, and somewhere deep inside her, beneath the exhaustion and the complicated joy of the win and the weight of everything she was carrying, something new was beginning. She did not have a word for it yet. She kept walking. The first thing Ada did after the competition was find a new place to sleep. Not because she was afraid. She had made a decision somewhere on the walk out of the auditorium that fear was not going to be the thing that organized her life anymore. She had been managing Aunt Bertha's version of her future since she was old enough to understand that the future being managed for her was not the one she wanted. And she had done it through a combination of stillness and intelligence and the particular kind of patience that looks like acceptance but is actually something else entirely. Something harder and more deliberate. She was done with that now. She called a classmate named Joy who had a single room off campus and owed Ada 3 favors from the previous semester, and she explained the situation in the flat, precise way she explained most things. Joy said yes before Ada had finished the second sentence. Ada moved her things that evening. It did not take long. She had never accumulated much, not because she lacked the instinct for comfort, but because she had learned early that things can be taken from you and the less you have the less can be taken. She had her laptop, her books, her clothes, her notes. She had the competition certificate, which she rolled carefully and wrapped in a plastic bag. She had the check, which she would deposit in the morning. She put Daniel's card on top of her books. She looked at it once. She did not call. Not yet. Joy asked no questions that first night, which was one of the reasons Ada had called her. She made tea, offered the left side of the bed, turned off the light. Ada lay in the dark and thought about the precise geometry of her situation. She was 21 years old. She was pregnant, approximately 6 weeks, the doctor had said, which placed the conception at the night she had been running, the night the drug had still been working through her body. She had a condition that made this pregnancy unlikely to be repeated. She had won the Innovate Nigeria Technology Prize, which came with a check for 500,000 naira and, more importantly, with a name. Her name attached now to something that could not be taken back. She had no family. Or rather, she had Aunt Bertha, which was its own particular category of having and not having. She had a child growing inside her. She lay in the dark and arranged these facts the way she arranged code, looking for the logic in them, looking for the structure that was already there underneath the noise. Because she believed, in the way that people who are very good at building things believe, that there is always a structure. You do not create it. You find it. She found it, there in Joy's dark room, somewhere around 2 in the morning. She was going to finish her degree. She was going to have this child. She was going to build the diagnostic tool into something that could actually be deployed. The competition win gave her the credibility to approach the health ministry partnerships she had been too unknown to pursue before. She was going to do all of this on her own terms, in the order she decided, without being reorganized by anyone else's emergency. She closed her eyes. She slept. Daniel Osei was not sleeping. He was in his office, the one on the 14th floor of the Osay Digital Building on Victoria Island, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Lagos skyline at night like a painting of a city rather than the city itself. He had a habit of working late that his assistant described as concerning and his board described as the reason the company was where it was. He did not describe it as anything. It was simply what he did. He was thinking about Ada Cole. Not in the way he had been thinking about her for the past 3 weeks, with the analytical remove of a man who has identified a situation and is deciding how to address it. He was thinking about her the way he had not let himself think about anyone in a long time. The particular, inconvenient, non-analytical way. He thought about how she had stood on that stage. How she had not collapsed into the accusation. How she had asked, into a room full of people, which of those facts changes the quality of the work, and how the question had landed in the room like something thrown, something that had hit its target before anyone had time to move out of the way. He thought about the way she had said, "I'm keeping the child." Not asking, not explaining, not waiting for his reaction before she completed her sentence. Informing him because he was involved in the truth of it and she believed he deserved to know, and for no other reason. He was 37 years old. He had built a company from a room in Surulere. He had done it through a combination of vision and stubbornness and the willingness to be in rooms where he was not yet welcome until the room decided it could not afford to keep ignoring him. He understood, from his own experience, the particular texture of a person who is building something real in conditions that are designed to make building impossible. He recognized it in her. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He was not going to call her at 2 in the morning. He was not that person. He went back to his work and did not entirely succeed at thinking about anything else. She executed the plan one day at a time. She attended every lecture, submitted every assignment, sat every test. She called the health ministry contact she had been given through the competition and had 2 meetings about piloting the diagnostic tool in 3 local government areas. Both meetings went well. She followed up with documentation before the relevant people had finished writing her name in their contact lists. She did not call Daniel. He did not call her. She told herself this was the correct arrangement, that they were 2 adults who had found themselves connected by a circumstance neither of them had chosen, and the most sensible way to manage that connection was carefully, without rushing it into something it had not yet earned the right to be. She told herself this and mostly believed it. Aunt Bertha came to the university 4 days later. Ada was in the library when her phone buzzed, Joy, texting to say there was a woman at the off-campus gate asking for her. Ada read the description. She closed her laptop. She walked out to the gate with the unhurried step of a person who has already decided how this conversation is going to go. Aunt Bertha was standing outside the gate in her good wrapper, the deep blue one she wore when she wanted to project authority. She was a broad woman, somewhere in her 50s, with a face that had been handsome once and was now composed, arranged into the expression of a person who is accustomed to managing the perceptions of those around her. She looked at Ada and her expression moved through several things quickly before settling on something that was trying to be warmth. Ada, she said, you've been avoiding my calls. I have, Ada said. Aunt Bertha's expression shifted slightly. She was not accustomed to that kind of directness from Ada. Ada had always been the quiet one, the accommodating one, the one who absorbed things rather than deflecting them. She was recalibrating. Come, she said. Let's find somewhere to talk. We can talk here, Ada said. A pause. Ada. You sold me, Ada said. Simply. Without performance. You arranged a bride price with a man I had never met and you sent Travis and 2 hired men to collect me in the middle of the night. I want you to say that you know what you did. Aunt Bertha's face did something complicated. I was trying to. I know what you were trying to do, Ada said. You were trying to solve a money problem using me as the currency. You have done that my whole life in smaller ways and I accommodated it because I was grateful and because I did not have enough power to refuse. I have power now. I am telling you clearly. Raymond and the arrangement are finished. If he comes near me or sends anyone near me again, I will use every legal resource available to me, and I have more of those now than I had 3 weeks ago. She said it quietly. She always said difficult things quietly. She had learned that volume is a form of uncertainty, that the people who are most sure of what they are saying rarely need to raise their voices. Aunt Bertha was very still. I also know, Ada said, that I am not your biological child. I have known for 3 years. I want to know where I came from. I want the truth of that. Whatever arrangement you made, whoever gave me to you or whoever you took me from, I want to know. Aunt Bertha's composure fractured. Just slightly. A thing behind her eyes that could have been guilt or could have been calculation. With Aunt Bertha it was sometimes impossible to separate the two. I don't know anything about your people, Aunt Bertha said. That is the truth. I found you. In a hospital. You were... She stopped. She started again. You were newborn. I took you. I needed another stop. Ada waited. Travis was sick. They said we needed a younger child in the house, some traditional thing, I don't know. I believed it at the time. I took you from the nursery. I never knew who your parents were. Ada stood with this information. She stood with it the way she stood with all information, completely until she understood its shape. Which hospital? She said. Aunt Bertha told her. Ada nodded. She turned to go. Ada. Aunt Bertha's voice had something unfamiliar in it. Ada turned back. I know I was not. I know it was not. She stopped a third time. She pressed her lips together. You were a good girl, she said finally. I knew that. Even when She did not finish. Ada looked at her. She felt nothing that she expected to feel. Not anger, she had finished with that. Not forgiveness, that was not something she was prepared to perform on schedule. Something more neutral than either. The simple recognition of a person who had done harm and was standing at the edge of understanding it without quite being able to step fully into that understanding. I know, Ada said. She walked back to the library. She opened her laptop. She found the name of the hospital. She began to look. She did not find anything in the hospital records herself. The records from 21 years ago were partial, inconsistently maintained, some of them lost in a system migration that the hospital administrator apologized for with the specific weariness of someone who had been apologizing for the same thing for years. But she had filed an inquiry. She had left her contact details. And she had gone back to her work, because the work was always there and the work did not wait for personal matters to resolve themselves. What she did not know was that someone else had already been looking. Had been looking, in fact, for 21 years with the resources that made the hospital records irrelevant, that made the system migration an inconvenience rather than a wall. Someone who had never stopped. Someone whose looking had simply, until now, been looking in the wrong direction. Ada did not know this yet. She would. 3 weeks passed. They were not quiet weeks. They were weeks of ordinary difficulty. The specific, unglamorous difficulty of a person who has just had something extraordinary happen and must now continue existing inside a life that has not yet caught up with it. Ada had the prize. She had the check deposited the morning after. She had a name that had begun to circulate in the kind of conversations she had previously only read about. She also had a pregnancy that was beginning to make itself known in small physical ways she was managing alone. A university semester she had not yet finished. And no fixed place to sleep that was truly hers. She had Sandra's absence. Sandra had not reached out since the auditorium, and Ada had not reached out either, and the silence between them sat in the background of everything like a sound that is not quite loud enough to identify. She had Daniel's card in her bag. She had not called. She moved through those weeks the way she moved through most difficult things. One task at a time, forward without looking too far ahead. She did her work. She ate. She slept. She let the competition win settle from a shock into a fact and waited to see what the fact would become. In those 3 weeks, she filed the hospital inquiry. She left her contact details. She went back to her work. She did not know she was being looked for. She was in the library on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks and 2 days after the competition, when Joy came to find her with an expression that Ada had never seen on Joy's face before. A kind of stunned, slightly odd look, as if Joy had just witnessed something she did not have the framework to process. There's a woman outside, Joy said. She came in a car. A big car. She's asking for you by name. Ada, Joy paused. She looks important. Ada saved her work. She closed her laptop. She walked outside. The woman was standing beside a black Mercedes, talking quietly on her phone. She was somewhere in her early 50s, with the particular composure of someone who has spent decades in rooms where the wrong expression could cost a great deal. She was dressed with an elegance that was not showy, the elegance of someone who has learned that the people worth impressing are rarely impressed by display. She ended the call when she saw Ada coming. She looked at Ada with an expression that Ada could not immediately classify, something layered, something that had clearly been prepared and was now, in the actual moment, struggling to remain composed. Ada stopped a few feet away. She looked at the woman. She waited. Ada, the woman said. Her voice was controlled but not entirely steady. My name is Florence Adeyemi. The name meant something. Florence Adeyemi was not a name you grew up in Lagos without hearing. She was the founder and executive chair of Adeyemi Holdings, a conglomerate that had its fingers in telecommunications, logistics, real estate, and 3 other sectors that Ada could think of without trying. She was on the covers of business magazines. She gave the occasional interview in which she said things that were thoughtful and precise and revealed almost nothing personal. She was, by most measures, one of the most powerful private individuals in the country. Ada looked at her and waited. "I received your inquiry from the hospital," Florence said. I had already been notified that someone was asking questions. She stopped. She composed herself. She began again. "I have been looking for you for 21 years. The air between them was very still. "I lost you," Florence said. "You were taken from the hospital nursery 3 days after you were born. The search has been." She stopped again. Her composure was doing a significant amount of work. "I had a DNA sample submitted to the hospital alongside my inquiry. They matched it to the sample you provided. She looked at Ada. The composed, powerful, carefully managed face of Florence Adeyemi did something that Ada did not expect. It became, for just a moment, the face of a woman who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been offered the possibility of setting it down. "I am your mother," she said. Ada stood with that sentence. She stood with it completely. Around her, the ordinary sounds of a university afternoon continued. Somewhere a generator hummed. Somewhere a group of students laughed. A car horn sounded from the main road. The world did not pause for the sentence. The world continued exactly as it had been continuing, indifferent to the thing that had just rearranged itself inside her. She looked at Florence Adeyemi. She thought about the hospital nursery, about Aunt Bertha's confession at the gate, about the 21 years that had existed between the taking and this moment on a university path in Lagos with the afternoon light falling at that particular angle. She thought about the question that had followed her since Mrs. Afolabi had asked it over a 7-year-old's mathematics. "Where did you come from? Tell me," Ada said. "Tell me everything." They sat in the back of the Mercedes for 2 hours. Florence talked. Ada listened. The driver had been dismissed to a respectful distance. The afternoon became evening through the tinted windows. Florence had been 29 when Ada was born. She had been, at that point, already building what would become Adeyemi Holdings, working 18-hour days, building something from a business plan and a loan and the particular stubbornness that was, Ada recognized with a start, exactly the same stubbornness she had been navigating her own life with for as long as she could remember. Florence's husband, Ada's father, had been a quiet man, a civil engineer, someone who had loved Florence with a patience that matched her intensity. He had died 8 years after Ada was taken. The grief of losing a child, Florence said, and then the grief of losing him, had compressed into something she had managed by building, by working, by refusing to stop looking even when the looking produced nothing year after year. "I never stopped," Florence said. "I want you to know that. I understand if you don't." She paused. "I understand if knowing doesn't change anything for you. I understand if 21 years is too much distance. I am not here to ask you to feel something you don't feel. I am here because you are my daughter and you were looking and I could not wait any longer." Ada sat with this. She sat with the shape of it, the mother who had not abandoned her, who had been on the other side of the distance the whole time, the father who had not lived to know this moment, the 21 years that could not be recovered. She sat with the anger too, not at Florence, at the fact of it, the plain, terrible fact of what had been taken, the childhood she had not had, the warmth she had not been given, the years she had spent making herself small enough to be tolerated in a house where she had been placed like furniture. She did not perform the anger. She let it exist quietly inside her alongside everything else. "I want to know you," Ada said finally. "I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't want to move into your life like a piece that was missing. I want to find out who you are and let you find out who I am and see what that becomes." Florence looked at her. The composed face had something in it that Ada was beginning to recognize, beginning to see as a reflection of something in herself. "That is exactly what I would have said," Florence said quietly. Ada almost smiled. Almost. The news, when it became news, moved the way things move in Lagos. Fast, through channels that have nothing to do with official announcements, carried by the particular velocity of information that is both true and extraordinary. Florence Adeyemi's long-lost daughter had been found. She was a final-year computer science student. She had just one Innovate Nigeria. She was carrying the child of Daniel Osei. Ada did not know how the last part became known. She suspected Sandra, who had proven herself willing to use information as a weapon and who had apparently not learned anything from the competition. She suspected it did not particularly matter how it had become known, because it was known, and known things have their own momentum. She found this out on a Wednesday morning when she arrived at the computer science department, and the quality of the attention directed at her had changed completely. Not the curious attention of a prize winner, which she had been managing for 3 weeks. Something more charged than that. Something that came with a particular silence when she entered a room, with glances that were held a fraction of a second too long, with the specific social static of people who are deciding how to recalibrate. She ignored it. She went to her morning lecture. She took notes. She asked the question she had been intending to ask before any of this started. After the lecture, her faculty advisor, Dr. Musa, called her into his office. He was a man of considerable dignity and very little patience for drama. He closed the door and looked at her across his desk with the expression of someone who has been fielding calls all morning on a matter he would prefer not to have been drawn into. "You are aware," he said, "that the university administration has received certain representations." "About my pregnancy," Ada said. "About your pregnancy and about various other matters." He paused. He chose his next words carefully. "There is a contingent on the disciplinary board that has raised the question of whether your conduct, whether your circumstances, conflict with the university's expectations of its students." Ada looked at him. "Does the University Code of Conduct contain a clause about pregnancy?" "It does not," Dr. Musa said. "Then what is the basis for a disciplinary proceeding?" Dr. Musa sat back in his chair. He picked up a pen. He put it down. "That is precisely the question I have been asking all morning," he said. Ada nodded. She stood up. "I appreciate you telling me," she said. "I have no intention of being expelled from this university. If anyone wants to pursue a disciplinary proceeding, they are welcome to identify the specific rule I have broken." She walked to the door. "Ada," Dr. Musa said. She turned. He looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite approval but was in the neighborhood of it. "Finish strong," he said. "Don't give them anything." "I never have," she said. Daniel heard about it from his head of communications, who had heard about it from a journalist who had called the company's PR department looking for a statement about whether Osay Digital's founder was expecting a child with the newly discovered daughter of Florence Adeyemi. Daniel sat in his office and looked at the ceiling for approximately 45 seconds. Then he called Ada. She answered on the third ring. "I was going to call you," she said before he could speak, "but I wanted to figure out what I wanted to say first." "What did you want to say?" A pause. "That I think we should meet. That there are things to discuss that should be discussed in person." "I agree," he said. "When?" "Tonight," she said. "If that works for you." It worked for him. They met at a restaurant on the island that was quiet on weekday evenings, the kind of place where the tables are far enough apart that conversations do not carry, where the staff have been trained to be unobtrusive. Daniel arrived first. Ada arrived exactly on time, in a way that felt less like punctuality and more like a refusal to perform either eagerness or nonchalance. She sat across from him and they looked at each other for a moment without the social structures that had surrounded their previous encounters. Not a car in the rain, not an auditorium, not a car park at a university gate. Just a table and 2 people and the accumulated weight of a situation neither of them had chosen. "Florence Adeyemi came to find me," she said. "I know," he said. "I am glad she did. She wants to be my mother. I think she has always wanted to be my mother. She just could not find me." Ada paused. She looked at the tablecloth. "It is a strange thing. I spent 21 years without a mother, without a real one, and now I have to figure out what to do with the fact that one has appeared." Daniel was quiet. He had learned, in the weeks since he had first let her into his car, that she did not need him to fill her silences, that the silences were part of how she thought and interrupting them was a form of disrespect. "I also want to talk about the child," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know the circumstances. I know what happened. I have thought about whether there is a version of this where I do not tell you, where I simply raise this child on my own and you never know the full truth of the connection." She looked at him. "There isn't. Not one I can live with. You have a right to know your child, whatever form that takes." He had been prepared for many things she might say. He had prepared himself carefully, the way he prepared for important meetings, by anticipating the range of possible conversations and deciding in advance how he wanted to show up for each of them. But he had not quite prepared for the particular way she said it, the completeness of it, the fact that she had thought about the version where she didn't tell him and rejected it not because it was impractical but because she could not live with it. He thought about his grandmother who called every Sunday. He thought about the 4 women at the dinner he had left early. He thought about the past 3 weeks, in which he had done his work and run his company and sat in his car outside a university gate once for 20 minutes before driving away without going in because he was not sure what he would say. "I don't want to be told about my child from a distance," he said. "I want to be here for it. For them. For you, if you'll let me." "I don't know what letting you means yet," she said honestly. "Then let's find out," he said. "Slowly. On your terms." She looked at him with that expression he still could not fully read, the one that was not closed but was not open yet either, the expression of someone who is considering whether the door is worth opening. "My terms," she said. "Your terms," he said. She picked up the menu. She read it carefully. She ordered without asking his opinion on the food, which he found, irrationally, to be among the most attractive things she had done in his presence. They ate. They talked. Not about the pregnancy, not about Florence, not about Sandra or the university or Raymond, who had by now received the full consequences of Daniel's lawyer's attention. They talked about her diagnostic tool and the ministry meetings and a specific technical problem she was working through. He asked questions that were not performative, questions he was genuinely curious about the architecture of the system, about the deployment decisions she had made. She answered them. She was, he discovered, a genuinely extraordinary thinker. Not in the way of someone who had been trained to present intelligence, but in the way of someone for whom thinking was as natural as breathing, who moved through problems the way a person moves through familiar rooms, knowing instinctively where the walls are. At the end of the evening, they walked out of the restaurant into the Lagos night. "I will call you," she said. "I mean it." "I'm not." She paused. "I don't play games with important things." "I know," he said, and he did. She got into the car she had called. He watched it leave. He stood on the pavement for a moment in the city noise and the warm night air and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something was beginning rather than continuing. The person who was not handling any of this well was Sandra. Sandra had been Ada's closest friend for 3 years. Sandra was also, and this is the part that matters, someone who had spent 3 years watching Ada be brilliant and accommodating it by telling herself that brilliance without connections goes nowhere. That she, Sandra, with her sharper elbows and her more aggressive social instincts, was better positioned to actually go somewhere. Then Ada won the competition. Then Ada turned out to be Florence Adeyemi's daughter. Then Ada turned out to be connected to Daniel Osei. And the story Sandra had been telling herself, the one in which Ada's gifts were theoretical and Sandra's hustle was practical, became impossible to maintain. What Sandra felt, standing in the ruins of that story, was not a simple thing. It was the complicated, corrosive feeling of a person who has bet against someone they know and lost. It had envy in it, yes, but also something uglier, the specific self-disgust of someone who has done something they cannot entirely justify to themselves and is redirecting that self-disgust outward because looking at it directly is too painful. She had told Ada's secret at the competition because she had wanted, in that moment, to level something. To make Ada small in the way she had always convinced herself Ada secretly was. Instead, she had made herself small. She had stood in that auditorium and been revealed as the kind of person who uses a friend's secret as a weapon, and the room had seen it, and she had had to keep existing inside that room. She had been waiting for Ada to confront her. Ada had not confronted her. The not confronting was, somehow, worse. Florence Adeyemi called Ada every morning. Ada had not asked for this. Florence had simply begun doing it. A call at 8, before either of them began their days, 15 minutes or 20 minutes in which Florence asked about Ada's health and Ada asked about whatever Florence was working on, and they both learned, slowly and without ceremony, the shape of each other's voices. Florence did not overwhelm her with gifts. She had made that mistake once. A package that had arrived at Joy's address the week after their first meeting, containing things of significant value, each one chosen with obvious thought and care. Ada had called her and said, gently but clearly, that she was not ready for that. Florence had said she understood. She had not sent another package. What she sent instead was attention. The daily calls, recommendations, a doctor she trusted for Ada's prenatal care, a lawyer who could advise on the university disciplinary matter, a government contact who could help with the ministry pilot. She sent these as information rather than interference. She provided them and left Ada to decide what to do with them. Ada used all of them. She was not too proud to use the resources available to her. She had been too poor for pride about resources for too long to waste time on it now. The doctor Florence recommended was thorough and warm and confirmed everything the first doctor had said. The pregnancy was progressing, the fetal position had stabilized, the risk of miscarriage had decreased. Ada should rest more than she was resting, eat more consistently than she was eating, reduce her stress levels, which was advice that made her laugh quietly in the doctor's office because the alternative to the stress was inaction and she did not know how to be inactive. She told the doctor this. The doctor said she would note it in the file. The university disciplinary matter resolved itself in the particular way that things resolve themselves when the person being disciplined has done nothing wrong and is prepared to say so precisely, and the person pursuing the discipline realizes, on examination, that they have no ground to stand on. The board met. Ada appeared before it with Dr. Musa beside her. She answered every question directly. She cited, where applicable, the specific clauses of the University Code of Conduct that did not say what the pursuing party wished they said. She was not aggressive. She was not apologetic. She was simply correct, and correctness, when held calmly and without apology, has a way of making the people who are wrong feel the wrongness without anyone having to say it directly. The case was dismissed. The head of the disciplinary board issued a formal statement affirming that no university regulation had been violated. The statement also, pointedly, reminded all faculty and staff that students were entitled to equal treatment regardless of personal circumstances. Ada read the statement in the library, said nothing to anyone, and went back to work. Florence made a public announcement 2 weeks after she found Ada. Ada had asked her to wait, not to keep the connection secret, but to give them both time to find the shape of it before it became something the public had opinions about. Florence had waited. When Ada said she was ready, Florence made the announcement at a press event she had already scheduled for another purpose, so it was not its own spectacle. She mentioned it at the end, clearly and without theater. She had found her daughter. Her daughter's name was Ada Cole, and she was a final-year computer science student and the winner of the Innovate Nigeria Technology Prize. The rest was private. The response was significant. Not because Lego Society was surprised. Lego Society had been speculating for 2 weeks, but because the confirmation of something changes its texture. It moves from rumor to fact, from something that can be dismissed to something that must be accommodated. Ada found out what it meant to be a confirmed fact on the Thursday after the announcement, when she arrived at the computer science building, and the quality of the silence when she walked in was different from the silence of the previous weeks. Not the static charged silence of people recalibrating. The quiet, slightly careful silence of people who have decided that they have always been kind to her, actually, and are hoping she remembers it that way. She remembered it accurately, which was not the same thing. But she was not interested in settling scores. She was interested in finishing her degree. She finished it. On a Friday morning in late November, Ada Cole sat in a hall with 300 other graduating students and listened to her name being called, and walked across a stage and received a certificate that represented 4 years of work done in conditions that were not designed for her to succeed, and had succeeded anyway. Florence was in the audience. She had asked carefully if she might come, and Ada had said yes. Daniel was in the audience. He had not asked. He had simply been there when Ada arrived, sitting 2 rows behind Florence, close enough to be present, far enough to not presume. She had seen him when she scanned the crowd before the ceremony and felt something that she was still not calling by its right name, though she was beginning to understand what name it deserved. Aunt Bertha was not there. Ada had not told her about the graduation. She had not told her about Florence or the competition or any of it. She had not spoken to Aunt Bertha since the conversation at the gate. She did not know yet what she would do with that relationship, whether there was something to salvage or whether it was simply something to acknowledge and move past. She left the question open. Open questions were sometimes the honest ones. Travis had called 3 times since the announcement about Florence. She had not answered. That question was less open. She walked across the stage. She received the certificate. She did not cry, because she had spent so long imagining this moment that the actual moment of it felt less like an arrival and more like a confirmation of something she had already known. She walked back to her seat. Across the hall, in the second row, Florence Adeyemi pressed her lips together and held herself very still in the way she held herself when she was feeling something she did not want the room to see. After the ceremony, in the courtyard outside the hall, Ada stood with the certificate in one hand and her phone in the other and let the moment be exactly what it was. Florence came and stood beside her. She did not hug her. She had learned, in these weeks, to wait for Ada to initiate contact, because Ada had spent 21 years learning who to trust through physical proximity, and undoing that learning took time, and Florence understood that. She stood beside her and they looked at the courtyard together. "Your father would have been here," Florence said. "He would have been the loudest one in that hall." Ada looked at her. "Tell me something about him," she said. "Something small." Florence thought for a moment. He could not remember the words to any song he had not heard in the last 3 days. He would sing the first line correctly and then invent the rest, completely confidently, as if he had no idea he was making it up. Ada smiled. A real one. It happened before she decided to do it. Florence saw it. She said nothing. She looked away so that Ada could have the moment without being observed in it. Daniel appeared at Ada's other side. He was holding 2 bottles of water, one of which he offered to her without saying anything. She took it. He nodded to Florence. Florence nodded back, the precise, mutually respectful nod of 2 people who have not yet decided what they are to each other but have agreed, for now, on a working civility. They stood together in the courtyard, the 3 of them, in the noise and warmth of graduation day, in the city that had been trying to reduce Ada Cole her entire life. She had not been reduced. She stood in the sunlight with her certificate and her water bottle and the 2 people who had arrived, late and imperfectly and without her asking, to stand beside her. She stood there and felt the afternoon on her face and thought about what came next. There was a great deal that came next. She was ready for it. The thing about arriving is that it does not feel the way you imagined it would. Ada had imagined graduation many times. In the hostel room in the early mornings before anyone else was awake. In the library on the nights when the work felt endless and the reasons for doing it had to be reconstructed from first principles. She had imagined the moment of it. The certificate. The stage. The feeling of having gotten to the other side of something. What she had not imagined was the morning after. She woke up in Joy's room on a Saturday with no lectures to attend and no assignment due and no examination to prepare for, and lay there in the particular silence of a completed thing, and felt, underneath the satisfaction, something that she did not immediately have a word for. A kind of vertigo. The vertigo of a person who has been moving toward something for so long that stopping, even stopping in the right place, the intended place, feels temporarily like falling. She lay there and breathed and let the feeling be what it was. Then she sat up. She put her feet on the floor. She opened her laptop. She had work to do. The ministry pilot had been approved 3 local government areas in Ogun State, beginning in 6 weeks. She had a technical team to assemble, a deployment timeline to build, a training protocol to write for the community health workers who would be using the system. She had a child growing inside her who would arrive in approximately 4 months and who would require things she was still in the process of figuring out how to provide. She had, she realized, more to do now than she had ever had before. The difference was that now she was doing it on ground she had chosen rather than ground she had been placed on. She made tea. She opened her notes. She began. Florence called at 8 as she always did. "How are you feeling?" Florence asked. She asked this every morning, not as a formality but as a genuine inquiry, with the particular attentiveness of someone who has missed years of mornings and is trying to account for each present one carefully. Good, Ada said. And then, because Florence had earned more than monosyllables, a little strange. The day after something you've been working toward. I know that feeling, Florence said. When I signed the first major contract for Adeyemi Holdings, the one that meant the company was real, not just something I believed would be real, I went home and sat in my kitchen for an hour. I did not know what to do with myself. What did you do? I made a list of everything that needed to happen next, Florence said. And then I started on the first thing. Ada smiled into her tea. I'm already on the list, she said. Florence laughed. It was a sound Ada was still getting used to, the laugh of a woman who did not deploy it casually, which meant that when it came it was real. Ada collected these real things carefully. She was building a picture of her mother from them the way you build a picture of anything you want to understand. Slowly, from the details, from the things that reveal themselves only when the person forgets to be composed. They talked for 20 minutes. When the call ended, Ada set her phone down and sat for a moment in the quiet. She thought about her father, the man who sang the wrong words to songs with complete confidence. She thought about the fact that she would never know what his voice sounded like. She held that thought completely without looking away from it. Then she let it settle into the part of her that held all the things she could not change, and she went back to work. Sandra came to find her on a Monday. Ada had not sought her out after the competition. She had not avoided her either. She had simply been busy with things that mattered and Sandra had not been among them. She had thought about what Sandra had done and she had felt what she felt about it and she had filed it in the part of her mind that held information she needed to keep but did not need to act on immediately. Sandra appeared at the door of Joy's room looking like someone who had been preparing for a conversation for weeks and had finally exhausted her ability to delay it further. She was thinner than she had been. Her eyes had the slightly overworked quality of a person who has not been sleeping well. Ada looked at her and waited. "Can I come in?" Sandra said. Ada stepped aside. Sandra came in and sat on the edge of the bed without being asked. An old habit from the years of easy friendship, the automatic ease of someone who had been in this room many times. Then she seemed to remember that the ease was not currently available to her, and she sat more formally. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," Sandra said. "Take your time," Ada said. She sat in the desk chair. She was not performing coldness. She was simply not performing warmth that was not yet there. Sandra looked at her hands. "What I did at the competition was wrong," she said. "I know that. I knew it when I was doing it. I think that's the part that I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway because I was—" She stopped. She started again. "I was angry, not at you specifically, at the situation, at the way things had, at the way everything seemed to be going for you and nothing was going for me, and I know that's not." Another stop. "I know that is not a justification. I know it doesn't make it okay." Ada looked at her. She thought about 3 years of friendship. She thought about the late nights and the borrowed notes and the easy laughter that had felt, when it was happening, like something solid. She thought about standing on that stage and hearing Sandra's voice from the side of the auditorium and the way the room had shifted. "You have always known what I was working with," Ada said. "You knew about Aunt Bertha. You knew that I had nothing to fall back on. You knew that the competition was not a nice thing to win, it was necessary. And you used the one piece of information that could have taken it from me." She paused. "I don't need an explanation for why you did it. I understood why you did it before you came here. What I want to know is whether you understand what you did." Sandra was quiet for a long time. "I tried to hurt you," she said. "That's what I was doing. I dressed it up as something else in my head, but that is what I was doing." Ada nodded. She sat with the admission. It had cost Sandra something to make it. She could see that. The cost did not erase what had been done, but it was not nothing. "I don't know yet what I want to do with our friendship," Ada said. "I'm not telling you it's over. I'm not telling you it continues. I need time to figure out what I actually feel when I'm not in the middle of managing a crisis." Sandra nodded. Her eyes were bright in the way that eyes get when a person is holding themselves together by concentration alone. "Okay," she said. She stood up. She moved to the door. She turned back once. "I am sorry, Ada. Not for how things turned out for you. For what I did." Ada looked at her. I know, she said. Sandra left. Ada sat in the desk chair for a moment after the door closed. She was not sure what she felt. Something more complicated than anger and less complete than forgiveness. Something that existed in the space between those two states where most real things live. She turned back to her laptop. She went back to the deployment timeline. She would figure out what to do about Sandra when she knew what she felt. She had learned, over 21 years, that deciding things before you understand them is how you arrive at decisions that need to be unmade. The threat came from a direction she had not anticipated. She had anticipated Aunt Bertha trying something. Some attempt to extract value from the changed circumstances, to insert herself into Ada's new life as a tax for the old one. She had prepared for that with the lawyer Florence had recommended, who had quietly made clear to Aunt Bertha, through the appropriate channels, that certain actions would have certain consequences. She had anticipated Travis. He had called 11 times. She had not answered. She had not anticipated Raymond. Raymond had received the consequences of Daniel's lawyer's attention. The kind of consequences that arrive quietly but comprehensively and leave a person understanding that the ground has shifted permanently beneath their feet. She had assumed that was finished. She had assumed correctly, as far as Raymond himself was concerned. What she had not accounted for was Raymond's brother. His name was Victor, and he was a different species of problem than Raymond. Where Raymond was opportunistic, Victor was systematic. He was also, it emerged, connected to the kind of people who resolve disputes through means that the legal system was not designed to handle. Ada found out about Victor the way she found out about most things that other people were trying to keep from her, by paying attention. She had been at a ministry meeting in Abuja, staying at a guest house recommended by Florence's office, when she noticed the same car parked on different streets outside different destinations over the course of 2 days. She noticed because she was Ada, and Ada noticed things. She called Daniel, not Florence. Not because Florence could not have handled it. Florence was not a woman who was helpless in the face of threats. But Florence would have handled it by removing Ada from the situation entirely, by wrapping protective resources around her so comprehensively that Ada would have had no agency in what happened next. Ada understood her mother well enough by now to know this. She called Daniel because he had told her that her terms were her terms, and she trusted him to keep that promise. And because she needed someone who would tell her the truth about the risk rather than managing her away from it. He answered on the first ring. She told him what she had observed. He was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. She had learned that this was what his thinking looked like from the outside, this brief, concentrated silence before he spoke. "Don't go anywhere tonight," he said. "Stay in the guest house. I'm going to make some calls." "I'm not going to stay inside indefinitely," she said. "I have a meeting tomorrow morning." "I know," he said. "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking for tonight." She stayed in the guest house. She worked. She was not afraid, or she was afraid in the way that intelligent people are afraid of genuine risk, which is to say she took it seriously without letting it reorganize her. Daniel arrived in Abuja the next morning. He had taken the first flight. He appeared at the guest house at 7 before her meeting, and she opened the door and looked at him standing there in the early morning light with the particular expression of a man who has been awake most of the night and is managing it through will rather than rest. And she felt something move in her chest that she had been holding at arm's length for 3 months. She let him in. "Tell me what you found," she said. He told her. Victor had been making inquiries about her schedule, about her movements. It was not yet a direct threat. It was the preparation for one. Daniel had spoken to people who spoke to Victor's people, and the message that had been conveyed was precise and clear. Whatever Victor believed he stood to gain from any action against Ada Cole, the cost of that action would be exponentially higher than the gain, and the people prepared to ensure that cost were not people Victor wanted to disagree with. Ada listened to all of this. "Is it resolved?" she said. "I believe so," he said. "I want to keep someone near you for the next few weeks. Not visibly, just present." She looked at him. She looked at the question of whether to accept this, whether accepting it was a form of losing the control she had been building since she was old enough to understand that control over her own life was something she would have to construct for herself. She looked at it, and she looked at him, at the tiredness in his face and the steadiness underneath it, and she decided that accepting help from someone who had earned her trust was not the same as surrendering the control. It was one of the things control was for, to allow you to decide freely when help was worth taking. "Okay," she said. He nodded. A silence opened between them, not an uncomfortable one. The kind of silence that exists between people who have said enough true things to each other that they do not need to fill the space with performance. "You came last night," she said. "Yes," he said. "You have a company to run." "I do," he said. I have you to consider. And the child." He paused. "And not just because of the child." She looked at him. "I know that is not how you want to hear it," he said. "I know you have spent a long time not trusting declarations. I know that the way I say things matters less to you than the way I act, and I understand why, and I am not telling you this as a declaration. I am telling you because you deserve to know where I am. You told me where you were, from the beginning. I want to do the same." Ada sat with that. She sat with the specific texture of it, the fact that he had said it because she deserved to know rather than because he needed her to respond to it. The fact that he was not waiting for her to match it. He was simply putting it on the table and leaving it there, taking up no more room than the truth required. She thought about what she felt. Not what she was supposed to feel, not what would make sense to feel given the circumstances, what she actually felt. When she was honest with herself in the specific way she was only honest with herself in the quiet hours. She felt, when she was with him, the particular ease of a person who does not have to construct themselves carefully. Who can be exactly what they are and have that be enough. She had not felt that with many people. Florence, in recent weeks, was beginning to be one of them. Daniel, she was realizing, had been one of them since the car in the rain. Since the moment she had woken up in his guest room and walked out to find him, and he had looked at her with surprise rather than entitlement, as if he had expected her to be smaller than she was and was adjusting his expectations to fit the actual size of her. "I know where you are," she said. "I have known for a while. I was waiting until I was sure of where I was." He looked at her. "I'm sure," she said. Outside, Abuja was beginning its morning. Traffic sounds. A call to prayer from somewhere in the middle distance. The smell of the day starting. Ada sat in a guesthouse room 4 months pregnant with a deployment timeline to finish and a meeting in 2 hours and the particular, uncomplicated feeling of having said a true thing to the right person. It was not a grand moment. It was a quiet one. It was the kind of moment that does not look like much from the outside but that you remember, afterward, as the one where something began. The pilot launched 6 weeks later on a Tuesday morning in a local government office in Ogun State, in a room that smelled of printed paper and ceiling fans and the specific industry of a place where people come to do necessary things. Ada stood at the front of the room and watched 8 community health workers learn the system she had built. She watched their faces as the interface came up on the tablets, the small, practical tablets she had insisted on, not the impressive large screens that would have looked better in a presentation but that no health worker in a rural clinic would be carrying around a ward. She watched the moment when they understood what the tool did. Not the impressive version of that understanding, not the moment of abstract comprehension but the practical version. The moment when a health worker named Grace looked at the triage function and said, out loud to no one in particular, "This would have helped with that patient we lost in March." Ada heard that sentence and felt, in the part of her that held the reasons for doing things, a confirmation. This was why. Not the prize. Not the ministerial handshakes. Not the story of how she had gotten here. This moment, in this room, with Grace's voice and the ceiling fans and the tablets and the work being used for the thing it had been built for. Florence came to the launch. She stood at the back of the room and watched and said nothing until afterward, in the car park, when she told Ada that her father would have understood exactly what Ada had done and why, and that understanding would have made him prouder than any of the other things. Daniel came too. He sat near the back, beside Florence, in the slightly formal proximate peace they had established. 2 powerful people in the orbit of Ada Cole, both aware that their authority in this particular context derived entirely from her. He had been there for the past 6 weeks in the specific way he had promised, present without presuming, available without crowding. He had come to Abuja twice more. He had met Florence for dinner once, the 3 of them, in a restaurant where Florence had asked him several questions that were not quite an interview but were not an interview, and he had answered all of them directly and Florence had told Ada afterward that she approved, which was not something Ada had asked for or needed but which she received as the thing it was, her mother trying to take care of her in the way her mother knew how. The baby was 6 weeks from arriving. Ada felt this, the physical reality of another person approaching, the weight of them, the way her body had reorganized itself around the fact of them with a thoroughness she found, when she let herself notice it, remarkable. She had thought she would feel only the practicality of it. She had not expected the tenderness. She had not expected to find herself, in quiet moments, speaking to the child in her head. Not in words, exactly, but in the way you speak to someone whose language you are still learning. Sandra had done something unexpected. She had not tried to re-enter Ada's life. She had not pressed for resolution or forgiveness or the resumption of the friendship. She had done something that Ada had not anticipated and which, when she found out about it, shifted something in her understanding of Sandra. Not back to what it had been, but into something more honest. Sandra had reported the men who had been harassing Ada to the appropriate authorities. Quietly, through the university's student safety office. She had given a full account of what she had observed and what she knew, and she had done it without telling Ada she was going to do it or asking for credit afterward. Ada found out through the safety office, which had sent her a notification about the report. She had sat with that for 2 days before she called Sandra. "Why did you do it?" she said. "Because it was the right thing to do," Sandra said. "And because," a pause, "because the things I told myself about you were wrong and I needed to do something that was simply right, with no benefit to me." Ada was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Ada said. "I want to." They talked for an hour. Not about what had happened, not about the competition or the accusation or the consequences. About other things. Ada's deployment. Sandra's final year project. The ordinary texture of two people who have known each other a long time and are feeling out whether what they have can be remade into something they can both live with. Ada did not know yet whether it could. She thought it might. She left the question open. Open questions, she had decided, were not always a failure of resolution. Sometimes they were simply the honest acknowledgement that some things needed more time than you had given them. The child arrived on a Thursday. He arrived, as children sometimes do, slightly ahead of the schedule that had been carefully constructed for him, for days early, in the manner of a person who had decided that readiness was a matter of personal determination rather than external calendars. Daniel was there. He had been in Lagos for the week, close in the quiet way he had been close for months. When Ada called him at 2 in the morning, he was at the hospital before she had finished speaking to the admissions desk. Florence was there within an hour. She arrived composed and immediately began being practical, talking to the nursing staff, ensuring Ada had what she needed, occupying the specific space of a person who shows love through action because the other expressions of it are still too large to manage without losing their composure entirely. Ada noticed this. She noticed Florence at the window of the hospital room in the early hours of Thursday morning, looking out at the city with her back turned, and she understood that her mother was feeling something too large for the room. She understood it the way she had come to understand many things about Florence, by looking at the things she did not say and reading the truth in them. Ada went through labor with the same concentrated intensity she brought to everything that mattered. She was not performing bravery. She was simply present, in the work of it, in the reality of it, in the particular, extraordinary, impossible thing that a body does when it brings another person into the world. At 4:07 in the morning, her son arrived. He was placed on her chest and she looked at him and felt something that she had no architecture for. Something that did not fit inside any of the frameworks she had built for understanding her own life. Something that made those frameworks irrelevant. She looked at his face, at the particular, ancient, entirely new face of a person who had not yet encountered the world, and she felt, in the wordless way that some things can only be felt, that this was the beginning of something she could not have planned for and would not have missed for anything. She held him. She did not speak. She held him. Daniel stood beside her and looked at the child, and she watched his face and saw something happen in it that she had not seen before. A kind of undoing and remaking in the same moment, a person becoming something they had not been 30 seconds earlier. He reached out and touched the child's hand. The child's fingers closed around his. In the window, Florence turned from the city view and looked at them, the three of them together in the early morning light, and did not look away. They named him after Ada's father. Not the name Ada had grown up with as her father's name. Not the name Travis and Aunt Bertha had used, which belonged to a life that was finished. Florence had told her, in the weeks of their morning calls and their careful, building conversations, the name of the man who had raised Ada in spirit even if he had not raised her in fact. The man who had sat in a hospital with Florence 21 years ago and held a daughter he would lose 3 days later and loved her completely in the time between. She named the child for him. It was not a grand gesture. She did not announce it or explain it extensively. She simply told Florence, quietly, what she had decided, and Florence received it the way Florence received the things that were too large, with stillness, with composure, with the bright-eyed look of a woman who is holding herself together through the fierce exercise of will. "He would have been honored," Florence said. "I know," Ada said. 3 weeks after the birth, Ada was back at her desk. Not back in the way that erases what had happened. She was not the same person at the desk that she had been before. She was changed in the ways that change is supposed to work, not by subtraction, not by becoming less herself, but by the addition of something that made the self larger. She was Ada Cole, computer scientist, pilot project lead, daughter of Florence Adeyemi, partner of Daniel Osei. She was the mother of a child who slept beside her desk in the particular absolute way of newborns, as if sleep were a serious occupation requiring total commitment. She was all of these things simultaneously. She was learning how. The reckoning with Aunt Bertha and Travis came not because Ada went looking for it, but because they came looking for her. Travis arrived at Florence's building. He had found the address, which was not difficult since Florence Adeyemi was not a woman whose address was secret, and demanded to see Ada. The security staff turned him away. He came back the next day. He was turned away again. On the third day he sent a message through someone who knew someone who had Ada's number. A message that said, simply, that he had information about Ada's biological parents that he had not told her and that he would share it for a price. Ada read the message. She forwarded it to the lawyer. The lawyer sent a response that made very clear what the consequences would be for any further contact or any attempt at extortion, and the consequences were specific enough and credible enough that Travis did not send another message. She did not know whether he actually had information. She suspected not. Aunt Bertha had told her what Aunt Bertha knew, which was very little, and Travis had known less than Aunt Bertha. But she kept the lawyer informed, in the way you keep instruments calibrated. Not because you expect to need them immediately, but because readiness is a form of respect for your own safety. Aunt Bertha she handled differently. Florence had asked carefully whether Ada wanted to pursue legal consequences for the hospital theft, which was what it had been, technically, the taking of a newborn from a hospital nursery 21 years ago. Ada had sat with that question for a long time. She had thought about justice and about what it would cost to pursue it and what it would produce. She had decided against it. Not out of forgiveness. She was still working out what she felt about Aunt Bertha, and she did not believe in performing emotions that were not yet real. But because the justice she could get from pursuing it was not the kind of justice that would give her back anything she had lost. The years were not recoverable. The childhood was not recoverable. The man who had sung the wrong words to songs had been dead for 8 years, and no legal proceeding would change that. What she had instead was this: the pilot, the child. Florence's voice at 8 in the morning. Daniel's hand on her back in the late evenings when the exhaustion was real. The work that was being used for the thing it had been built for. She had built this herself. Out of the same conditions that were supposed to prevent her from building anything. She kept it. That was the justice. She kept what she had made. Daniel proposed on a Saturday afternoon in the most ordinary possible circumstances. They were in the kitchen of the apartment Ada had moved into, not Florence's house, not Daniel's building, her own apartment, which she had signed a lease on 6 weeks after the birth with the first payment from the ministry partnership. A 2-bedroom apartment in Yaba, close enough to the pilot's operational base, quiet enough for a newborn, hers in the way that nothing she had lived in before had been entirely hers. Daniel was there most evenings. He had his own place. He was there most evenings. They were making food, or rather Ada was making food and Daniel was attempting to be helpful in the kitchen in the way of someone who is competent at most things and has met his match in the task of not being in the way. The child was in the sitting room in the bouncer that Florence had sent, which Ada had initially said was excessive and had not returned. Daniel put down the thing he had been not helpfully doing and turned to her, and said her name in the particular way that signals that what follows is going to matter. She turned. He did not perform it. He did not have a speech. He said, "I want to marry you. Not because of the child is a reason to be grateful, not a reason to make a decision. Because I want to build my life with you and I am asking you directly, in the most straightforward way I know, if you want that too." Ada looked at him across the kitchen. She thought about the car in the rain. She thought about the guest room and the charged phone. She thought about the auditorium and the front row and the thing he had said simply, without flourish. She thought about Abuja and the first flight and the tiredness in his face and the steadiness underneath it. She thought about what she had said in the guesthouse room. "I'm sure." "Yes," she said. Not because it was the right answer for the situation. Not because Florence would approve or because it resolved something or because it made practical sense. Because she meant it. Because she had been careful and honest with herself about what she felt, and what she felt was this. She meant it. He crossed the kitchen. He held her in the way that people hold each other when they have come through something and are standing on the other side of it. Outside, Lagos continued in its volume and its heat and its relentless momentum. The child in the sitting room made a sound that was not quite a word yet, but was moving in that direction, practicing the shapes of things not yet said. Ada heard it. She smiled against Daniel's shoulder. She heard it, and it sounded, in the quiet behind the city noise, like the beginning of a language she was going to spend the rest of her life learning. There is something this story wants you to understand before it closes. It is not about money. It is not about the discovery of powerful parents or the arrival of a rich man or the reversal of fortune that rewrites the protagonist's position in the world. Those things happened and they mattered, and this story has not pretended they did not. But they were not the turning point. The turning point was earlier. It was in a doctor's office, when a young woman sat alone with the knowledge that she was pregnant and the knowledge that this might be the only pregnancy her body could carry, and made a decision not from hope or from desperation but from a complete and honest accounting of what she valued. It was on a stage when the same young woman was publicly accused and did not collapse into the accusation, but asked, calmly into a microphone, into a room full of people, which of those facts changes the quality of the work. It was at a gate, when she looked at the woman who had sold her and said what she knew and waited for the truth without begging for it. The fortune and the mother and the man who came on the first flight, these were not the story. They were the world catching up to who she already was. Ada Cole did not become worth something when Florence Adeyemi claimed her. She did not become worthy of love when Daniel Osei decided he wanted to build his life alongside hers. She was not saved by any of it. She was already the person she was going to be. She had been building that person for 21 years, in conditions designed to make the building impossible, and she had built it anyway, quietly, without applause, one decision at a time. The world simply, finally, got around to seeing it. There is a question this story leaves you with. If the road that brought Ada Cole to the life she was meant to live required every wrong thing to happen exactly as it happened, the hospital, the selling, the running, the rain, the fear, the loss, would she take back the road? She would not answer that question directly if you asked her. She would look at you with the expression that is not closed and not open and not performing anything. She would let the question sit in the air between you, and then she would look at her son, who was learning the shapes of things not yet said. And the answer would be in the looking.